participation. And we are going to start today's session with an invocation of a song. So let me just share the screen, please.
शक्ति देना मन विजय करे दूसरों के जैसे पहले खुद को जय करे हमको मन की शक्ति देना मन विजय करे दूसरों के जैसे पहले खुद को जय करे हमको मन की शक्ति देना भेद भाव अपने दिल से साफ कर सके दोस्तों से भूल हो तो माफ कर सके झूठ से बचे रहे सच का दम भरे दूसरों के जैसे पहले खुद को जय करे हमको मन की शक्ति देना मन विजय करे दूसरों के जैसे पहले खुद को जय करे हमको मन की शक्ति देना
So thank you so much for your kind attention. I, Randhir Kumar Gautam, on behalf of Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, I welcome all of you to attend today's webinar on the very topic, the development of self in the age of social media, creating transitional spaces through focused mediated practices. It is a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have available to us our distinguished speaker, Dr. Anusnigdha. She is psychology teacher, or I would say assistant professor from Birmingham City University, United Kingdom. I welcome moderator of today's session, Professor Kumar Giri from Madras Development Institution, Chennai, Professor Gyan Gului, Dr. Ravi Chandran, Minati Pradhan ji, and all our respected friends, participant, co-nurture of Swadhyasa Chakra Dialogue. Doctor, let me give a brief introduction of Dr. Anusnigdha. She is a psychology scholar and a teacher. She teaches in Birmingham City University as a full-time lecturer. She is a psychoanalytically oriented researcher with a socio-constructive perspective, focusing on interdisciplinary nature of understanding of development. She has many interests within psychology. She has interest of identity development, gender and sexuality, cross-cultural psychology, classical and contemporary psychoanalytic theory, so on and so forth. Let me also give a brief introduction of Swadhyay Sahchak. It is a circle of co-learning and mutual studies of self and society. It is an initiative of uh, Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, which is a public intellectual trust. Friends associated with this are eager to walk and mediate with new horizons of thinking and new movements of social and cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chitranjan Das, a creative thinker from Orissa, and many others from and around the world. We also present our own writings and reflect upon our creativity together. We also invite people from different fields of life, having different orientation of knowledge, to share us with their knowledge, wisdom, visions, sadhana, and struggles and quests for making the world which is beautiful, have dignity, justice, and have a culture of dialogue. We meet every Sunday or sometimes on Wednesday. We are now nurturing this dialogue with collaboration with many important institutions of India and also abroad. So today we are going to have a webinar on the very topic, the development of self and identity in the age of social media, interacting meditative practices to psychoanalytic perspectives. That was recently published in Rote's book called Rethinking Media Studies, Media, Meditation, and Communicative Action. So first I would like to invite our resource person to share his understanding on the very topic for 40 minutes, and then we will invite our respected participant to have engaging session. Thank you so much. So Dr. Anusnigdha, you are cordially invited to share your thoughts.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction that you have given as well. And thank you everyone for being here today to listen to me. And thank you, Professor Giri, for inviting me to give this talk on this topic. For me, this feels like a very contemporary issue that we need to look at, with social media being so prevalent. And in my background, I will be working today with works of Donald Winnicott, who was an English psychoanalyst, and he was primarily working with children during World War II, children who were orphaned. And he was looking at what troubles them and how do we help them become holistically whole people and help their development. So I'm taking his theories from the 1950s and applying them to contemporary age, where social media is so prevalent, and it is an issue that is affecting the development of children, and to consider how we can help them achieve their true self. So in contemporary society these days, social media is not just a method of communication as it began. It has evolved to have its own language, it has its own culture, it has a sphere where people can participate in, they can become a part of a bigger group, depending on what your interests might be. And the use of internet has become prevalent for everyday activities, and it has been increasing since the turn of the century in early 2000s. But the past few years, especially with the COVID pandemic and everyone being in lockdown, locked at home, has seen a dramatic increase in accessing online groups for help, for education, for news, for social support, even relaxation, and watching movies and just socializing as you would. And given this pervasiveness, and given the amount of time children spend on online communities, on social medias today, they play a very important role in the development of their psyche and in their concept of self and how did they understand themselves. So from a psychoanalytic perspective, the individual's self is what we refer to as ego. And their conscience, their morality as it develops, is called the superego. And both of these are developed through internalizations of what we see outside in our physical reality. And internalization here becomes a process of unconsciously assimilating what the external reality is. So this is influenced by the relationships people might share with their parents, with their friends, with the socio-cultural environment that they are growing out in. And from this sort of preliminary assimilation, when the baby is born, they're assimilating everything that they see. The individual self develops through a process of gradual distinction between what is the external world, what is the internalized objects, and then they integrate this to form a composite of what forms their self. And in today's date, social media forms part of this external environment that they will internalize and composite into a part of their identity as well. Now, there are a number of benefits of the online communities and social media for children with regards to entertainment, with regards to education, with regards to socialization, keeping in touch with people across the world like we are doing right now. But it's not without the potential pitfalls that we can assume are there, because of the unconscious nature of the internalization process, if there is a prolonged exposure that is unregulated, there is no limit to what the child might be accessing in these groups, the development is influenced in ways that the child themselves may not be consciously aware of. And this is the part that we need to look at, and we need to consider what is the extent of the unconscious influence of the social media, of the external world around us, and how do they interfere with the transitional space that the child develops within. And this Winnicottian concept of transitional space is an experience of almost formlessness. It is a state of being while you are negotiating what is your subjective internalization with what is the objective external experiences. And this state, to exist within this state of being formless, is essential to the development of a healthy true self, as Winnicott called it. Now, with the use of focused meditative practices in our daily lives, we can continue to create these transitional spaces for ourselves and allow for the development of this true self, despite what the external interferences might be, despite what things we might internalize. And examining this internal reality during focused meditation will allow us to consciously practice self-observation, self-reflection, and achieve this awareness of the internal psychic processes as they might be existing. So by putting together this concept of transitional space from psychoanalysis, I will be looking at how we can use these focused meditative practices to develop a more holistic sense of self for ourselves, but also to be able to guide children who are developing and might not have as much awareness as they could possibly have. And the psychoanalytic perspective here is focusing on the individual's unconscious, the role it plays in our development. And this is why psychoanalysis is very different from traditional methods of psychology. And the importance is placed on the early interactions with caregivers. So when Winnicott was working during the World War II, these were often children who did not have primary caregivers, and he saw what the influence was on their development. And he looked at how psychic structures, the personality, identity, developed because of the experiences these children had, and how these experiences were then internalized. So the child is internalizing these early interactions in terms of how they perceive themselves and how their self is perceived by others as well. And repeated patterns of these experiences then form these constructions of the ego and their self, and it guides how they will interact with others as well. So the psychic structure, as within this theory would understand it, we are born with unconscious drives that fulfill our needs, basic needs that the child is born with for food, for attention, to survive. And with the internalizations, we develop our morality, our superego, the conscience, and the ego, the self, works as a negotiator between these two, what we want and what we should do. And our self is created through these dynamics. So the early interactions with the parents, sometimes they're idealized, sometimes it's telling children not to do certain things. It might make them feel like they are not allowed to do certain things. All of these things are internalized, and they learn what they can do within society and what they shouldn't do, and what is acceptable. And these layers of experiences then become integrated, and a consolidated self structure, a true self, emerges out of this. And from Winnicottian perspectives, the mother or the primary caregiver here plays an important role. The first thing that she does is to provide the child with what they need. Here, I'm using mother as a gender neutral term. It can be the father, it can be the grandmother. It is the primary caregiver that the child is interacting with. And her role is to go beyond these physical needs. Her role is to create an environment for the child where he has almost an illusion of omnipotence. Whatever the child wants, the child gets. So the child thinks, I can imagine whatever I want, and this emerges in front of me. I feel omnipotent. I can do anything I want. And the mother here then creates an environment, what they refer to as a holding environment for the child, and mirrors the child's needs. So Winnicott describes this as a process of the child thinking, when I look, I am seen, and so I exist. And the child's needs are thereby confirmed that what I want is valid and I can get what I want. So creating a sense of who they are in this environment that the mother is creating for the child. And this serves as a very important function for bringing the world to the child, because the infant, when they're born, cannot actually go and interact with the world around them. So the mother in pieces brings the world to the child and creates this illusion of omnipotence for the child. And gradually, as the child grows up, this environment that the mother creates for the child allows the child to consider what creativity is. It allows them to make up games and play creatively for them. It allows them for a space to just be. They can be themselves, they can be alone, and they can understand what is going on at this time. So the mother is not only shaping the world to the child's demands, but they're also present in a non-demanding way. So if the child does not have any needs, the mother does not present the world to the child. But if the child thinks that they might have a need, the mother is there to present this to them, allowing the child to just be. This is a central feature in developing a stable sense of self. And if this is interrupted, the child doesn't understand who they are. So what happens is, if the mother is constantly presenting the world to the child, even when the child does not need this, they do not understand where they end and where the world begins. So it creates a sense of false self, as Winnicott calls it, where you're only reacting to what the world presents to you. You don't have the space to understand yourself, to create a space where you can separate yourself from the world. And this space is the transitional space. It is transitioning from what is initially a very self-centered world for the child, only thinking about what they want, what they are, what they can get, to understanding there are other people around me, other people have needs, and I can't simply do whatever I want. And this transitional space is not only for children, it's something we use as adults as well. It allows for a capacity to imagine, to be creative, to consider ideas, where we can see what the reality is and we can understand what our internal subjective experiences are and play with these and consider what we can do with it. So the transitional space and achieving this space is very important to express yourself, to live a content happy life, moving from a infantile stage of dependence to an independent self. Um, and when we consider the culture that we have right now with social media started as a way to stay in touch with your friends. That's how Facebook started. And people were moving away from university and colleges and schools, and they realized we can stay in touch with our friends. We can make new friends. We can meet so many people across the world we wouldn't have otherwise. But this development that took place, this rapid growth within social media, is not a natural development of technology. It seems that way, but social media companies invest a lot of money to make them as addictive as possible, to make sure you spend enough time, you post content, you create friends, you interact with what other people are presenting as well. And it goes beyond what they had initially considered them to do. And these days, it's not something we can move away from. WhatsApp groups and Instagram profiles and Facebook profiles. It's become integrated in anything that you want to do. So if you want to access educational content, then you have to have a profile online. You have to spend time online. If you want to read an ebook, if you want to watch a movie, if you want to play some games, go shopping, travel, what have you, anything that you want to do, social media and online cultures have now become integrated in it. So the child is now growing up with an external reality that goes much beyond what we had access to growing up. So it's become a layer that becomes internalized. Um, and as we can see that younger children are being born into this world, so they tend to use social media much more than older generations. They're born into it, and this is the reality that they know. This is what they consider is part of normal world. But giving so much access with so many notifications, with so much demands that online communities place on children to participate within this culture, there are adverse effects that exist. So research shows us that there are influences on their physical development, on their cognitive development and their abilities to think, their psychological development, as well as in some cases harming their real social relationships that exist in a physical reality and not the online reality. So if you tend to use online groups a lot more, if you tend to use social media a lot more, you tend to be sedentary, you tend to sit in a place which is linked with obesity, with health-related issues. In terms of cognitive abilities, there is lowered attention span because there are so many apps going on, there are so many things to look at. There is problems with memories that can be seen in children because they're no longer using the traditional method of memorizing what we used to do in school, and they have the internet to consider, so they can just look it up. They don't need to remember any of these emotions. And there is a lack of a recognition of social cues that is developing as well, because when you have a real world interaction, you can pick up expressions, you can pick up different things in person that you can't do through social media posts. So there is a disengagement that is happening in children, which might in some cases overpower the need to stay connected in person as well. So they find it easier, they find it more relaxing to be online, or even in adults, it can be used as a way to run away from responsibilities, or I'll keep watching this Netflix show right now and I'll deal with my duties later, which is something that children see adults do. And this is something that they internalize then, that this is acceptable. I can spend so much time online, and this behavior that other people demonstrate online becomes acceptable, becomes part of who they are. And online communities encourage participation. You post something and you can see how many people liked it, how many people shared this. And this sort of instant instant feedback from the community for children also has implications, because if their post is not as liked as their friends, or maybe a previous post that they had online, then that tends to affect their self-esteem. Why did this post not get as many likes? Or I post something about my day-to-day activities, and I can see other people seem to be living much grander lives. You can see them on holiday, you can see them going to attractive tourist places, but I'm stuck at home and I can't actually go anywhere, which affects self-esteem in children especially, as well as the content that is posted. So a lot of it goes through filters. I can edit how I look in photos rather than presenting something that I might be unhappy with. I can make myself thinner, I can make myself fairer, I can make, oh, I have a pimple right now and I can remove that and present a perfect sense of self to the world. And this is a reflection of the lack of self-acceptance for ourselves, which is normalized on social media. And uh, this focus on hyper successful individuals, or someone who seems very successful, even if they have used these filters, even if they've taken this photo from a shot that is not a reflection of their real life, but what we see is this snippet, and that affects children's development because it can lead to feelings of insecurity, among other things. It leads to eating disorders, negative body image issues, and generally a very unrealistic expectations of themselves and of life. So when they grow up, they want to be able to do this. They want to become social media influencers, as opposed to developing something that would affect their identification as well. So this impingement or this interference that Winnicott talked about, that the mother might have initially, interfering with the child's development of their true self, is now a role that is now taken over by social media. There is no space for the child to just be. Any physical activity that they used to do is now replaced by social media. So these constant interferences, this impingement, is what the self is now reflecting. This is what they're responding to. And their development keeps becoming more towards this false sense of self, rather than having this transitional space to develop a true self and then adequately respond to the social media posts. Um, there are many more influences that social media has, but in the interest of keeping to the topic, I will not go into the psychology of that, but look at how these transitional spaces can be developed within oneself and for the child as well. And this is one of the primary aims of psychotherapy, where the therapist or the counselor attempts to recreate the transitional space that the mother would have in childhood. Allow a room for the person to come in and express their thoughts and reflect on what their thoughts are, and create a holding environment for the individual to be able to uh, get this creative ideas again, so they can bring out the true self. The true self is now lying hidden within, behind all these notifications and the impingements and the interferences, and the false self is now protecting the true self, so it is not affected as much. In that sort of process, what we see is constantly the false self. So the therapeutic aim is to create a space for the true self to emerge, so that the false self is not needed anymore. And the aim here is then we're trying to make the unconscious that has been affected so far in the past conscious in the present, to be aware of what is going on and what the influences might be, and to what extent they might be influencing us as well. Um, and this is where the aims of meditation come into being as well. This is where they are synonymous almost in what they want to achieve with the individual. Uh, and there are a huge varieties of meditative practices. They have different philosophies associated with them. And meditation can mean a number of things. It can mean you're turning inwards and observing yourself. It can mean the process of becoming conscious of consciousness, or to even consciously observe what thoughts or feelings might exist in a particular moment. It can be used as a self-liberation process. It can be used for self-realization. But ultimately, what these activities and philosophies aim at doing is uh, it requires a sort of commitment for yourself to move towards a psychic development, to move towards a spiritual development. And psychotherapy similarly requires this sort of commitment to understand the root of why certain processes exist as they do. What are some unconscious defenses that might exist? How do I protect myself? And strengthening the ego in order to be able to achieve this sort of self-liberalization. There are certain differences. One of the biggest one is the use of the word ego. In meditative practices, in these philosophies, the aim is to rid yourself of the ego, to move past this, to achieve egolessness. But psychoanalysis is talking about strengthening the ego, making it stronger. So this creates a bit of problems between the dialogues that can take place within the two. But the aim here is to look at how these words are used and what they actually mean. So we might both be using within both traditions the word ego, but they don't mean the same thing. So what it means actually from a psychoanalytic perspective is to look at uh, getting a distinction between what is internal and what is external. The capacity to have these thoughts is because of the ego. It doesn't mean a ego in the sense we use it in our everyday language or connections to the world in that sort of sense. It would take a sort of mature ego organization from a psychoanalytic perspective, even to just practice meditation, to reflect on your moment to moment processes that are taking place between the mind and the body and how they interact as well. Any sort of emotions that you can recognize within them, within yourself, would be because of your ego organization. So if we look at it from a clinical perspective, meditation is actually strengthening this ego psychic structure that exists within all of us. So moving beyond the debates that can be started because of the word, the aim here is to create introspection, to be able to decrease any sort of narcissistic or egocentric traits that might be there, to understand what we are responding to and to the extent with which the external world is affecting us. So there are days where I can just be in a bad mood and I'm walking around and I don't know why I'm in a bad mood. But through the practice of meditation and reflecting on when this bad mood started and what was the cause and how do I move beyond simply just being in a bad mood that was affected, something in the morning happened, uh, is bringing together the ability to be in a transitional space through meditation. And aspects of meditation will then allow for personal responsibility of how things are affecting us. And the aim here is to create an awareness, to be able to tolerate certain emotions and to let them go, and to not be as troubled with them, to not internalize these troubles, but consciously accept the fact that these emotions might be present and to let them go, which is again with therapeutic aims of managing anxiety, of unable to mourn the past. So once you're able to do this, you can create a new self for the future. And focused meditation is then focusing on different activities that can be undertaken. So from the simplest activities of mindfulness exercises, focusing on your breathing or focusing on a candle that is lit in front of you, just observing the flame as it flickers, uh, allows you to be in a state that is perceptual because you're perceiving of your thoughts or the candle or a point in front of you, but also non-perceptual because that is all you are focused on. And it creates this sort of area, or this state of being of perception and non-perception at the same time, that allows awareness of any thoughts that might emerge. And during in this stage, you can have a ability to keep track of your inner reality and the outer reality and see how they are separate, see how they're interrelated, and allow a sort of restructuring of the identities. For children, if these simple tasks of mindfulness, of breathing exercises, of focused meditation, if employed, they can be more aware of how much time they're spending online and to what extent are they involved in possible dramas that might be going on social media, how much of the content that we're viewing is affecting them, and to separate that virtual reality from the physical reality, and to separate the illusions that are created and to shed them, and to be able to create this sense of self, of the true self, within the transitional spaces that are then created through meditation. So essentially, what meditation, focused meditation, does here is it eliminates, or it replaces the need for an external therapist to provide the space. And I am then able to create my own transitional space without any external help, reflect on the realities, and consider allowing my true self to simply emerge from where it's hiding behind the false self at this point. uh, the access to possibly unintegrating from the virtual reality that is created allow for creativity to be able to play with ideas, and most essentially for a capacity to be alone. I do not have to constantly concentrate on what notifications are coming through my phone. I don't have to concentrate on what the external world is doing, and I can focus on myself and thereby allow the development of a true self and a true identity, even when the external world is being extremely interfering. And for children, this will allow them to create this awareness and to consider what harm unconsciously might be going on because of the impingement, because of exposure to social media, and develop this transitional space by themselves where they can be creative, where they can play, and where they can simply be and become holistic adults eventually. Um, that's the outcome that we would hope for. And that is my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It is one of the best session. Very beautiful. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And really, it is very interesting. And we have 46 participants, and there are many participants through our social media platform. So now it's time for question answer session. So dear and respected friend, if you have any comments or question, please indicate me in the chat box, or you can also write in the chat box. So first, I would like to invite, I can see the Professor Gyan Goloi. Yes.
Thank you very much. I do not know whether my microphone is functioning appropriately because I had some problems today.
It is
Can you
working.
hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, yes, I am an enthusiast because it was really very, very interesting. Really very, very interesting because I found, among other things, in this process of introspection and in the transpositional space, many analogies with some arguments and subjects which I am dealing with in these days. That is, I think that in a certain sense, and this is an interpretation which is proposed nowadays. The Plato's myth of the cave can be reinterpreted in a way of introspection against, so to speak, all the influences of the external, of the external reality, of the apparent reality, in order to find a more the true self against the, so to speak, the self which is produced through the internalization of the apparent reality. And this is a way of interpreting Plato, which is, in my opinion, much promising. And while I was hearing, I was remembered of many articles which I have read on Plato now in the last days, and with this, for instance, about the transformation of the transpositional space through meditation and the necessity of introspection, the opportunity of introspection, excuse me, the strengthening of the psychic structures. Also, this was a very important point for me in this moment, and the intention of making the ego stronger, for instance, also. And on the other side, on the other hand, also the problems which are created through and because of the social media, if I've correctly understood while hearing, while listening, in the children, the lack of attention, the lack of memory, for instance, and also the production's feelings of insecurity. Anyway, the what I could perhaps synthesize with lack of dependence, and and of course, this our structure of the internalization of the social media in the mind, in the psyche. This was really very interesting for me. I noted very many things, and uh, I would like perhaps to ask the question about the point of the spiritual development, because this point is, in my opinion, at least very important. And also here we have an analogy with Plato, for instance, because also for Plato, the spiritual development is necessary in order to contrast the realm of the opinions which enslaves an individual. And well, I would like to ask how how the process of the spiritual development is in the therapy, because I I would be very interested in saying in seeing how this also also the therapeutic method which is applied in order to reveal the true self, because also here, in my opinion, we could have some analogies with the problem of ancient Greek philosophy, and in particular of Plato. Plato has this problem, and perhaps is an aspect which in the ancient philosophy is not so much dealt with. But anyway, so this aspect, for instance, of the therapeutic method, which is applied to reveal the true self, would interest me very much, very much. So anyway, I thank you very much, because it was really very interesting, and I could take many notes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With regards to your question, before even I get to the question, sorry, you're very right. There are a lot of similarities with ancient Greek philosophies, and psychoanalysts have traditionally been influenced by these philosophies. So the allegories that you mentioned are something that they have worked with in their work. So instead of creating something new completely, they've gone back to the ancient masters and seen what knowledge exists there and integrated that as their theories developed. With regards to therapeutic aims with spiritual development, the aim is always been to create a more holistic person. And while not all psychoanalytic theories have the aim of spiritual development, it is something that they hope that the individual is able to achieve if that is what something that they need. There have been a lot of psychoanalytic therapists who have been influenced by Buddhist philosophies as well, and with meditation. And there was one I remember practicing Buddhist meditator and analyst who had written something along the lines of if we'd recognized the power or the similarity of meditative states, then a clear link would have been made between these two traditions ages ago. And the fact that it hasn't been so far is a result of one, the therapeutic aspects being developed in the West, where these meditative practices might not be as prevalent, and where these practices are prevalent and they're not taking in the therapeutic aspects. And the two have not been had the space to actually integrate together. But the aim within the therapeutic room would be to allow the person to rid themselves of these external worries, to achieve what their internal negotiations are actually working towards. And in my opinion, that eventually, after a certain point, once you've worked with the immediate concerns, will lead to spiritual development, because that is the way forward. And how else do you achieve a more holistic sense of yourself as well? So explicitly, there is work that is happening, but I hope that it will go much further in future research as well.
Thank you. Any other friends? Minati ji? Yes, Minati Pradhan.
Hello. Yeah. Am I audible? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank Dr. Anusnigdha ma'am for her very beautiful and very insightful presentation. To her presentation, okay, I'm no expert. First, let me reveal that or admit that. But just I would like to add few more points. When she was telling that internal world and external world, I feel now we have got another layer of external world. External world is divided into two things, like real and virtual world. And she had two parts of her presentation, like that children addicted to the social media, and in the end, the elders developing the development of self or self development. So there, when we see, that today's scenario is very much responsible for why the children get addicted to the social media. First thing is that being the nuclear family, and second thing, we elder, we go there for instant gratification. But what we are telling about the younger children, that is the prime caregiver is, of course, obviously very much important. But when the children grow, that there comes a generation gap. If you keep on telling them the things that the adverse effect of using social media, or don't do this, even though you be a role model, they take it as a generation gap. Then how that can be filled? One of my thing is how that can be filled. And that the development of self, ma'am was telling, that these are obviously very important. Childhood memories, I mean, we all as a human being, we search, that success and approval of others make us the human being what we are. It contributes to our self development and self being. Actually, the cognitive and the motivational route also makes um, very much gives very much importance in this. But what happens in this malleable self concept? Sometimes, no, each and everybody search for acceptance. So once somebody, how we can overcome this so that it will pass on to the other children, to the our children. And as Ganluji sir was asking about that spiritualism thing, so I have one of my own observation. I can just add few points. That no, inwardness can actually in elders can change the destiny, I mean, no, the way we live also. When we turn our attention inside, we start changing our destiny. I'm telling for this because you start realizing how I am, you more interpret, I mean, you look into yourself, it changes. a profound sense of dissatisfaction can change into, towards the inner happiness, actually. When we turn inward, we gain control of our inner complex individuality. We learn truly who we are. The state of our well-being is depend on our consciousness. When it governs from inside, we start gaining control over our psychology, eventually on our body. And that's all today. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I request respected speaker to please note down these questions, and you can answer those on concern at the end of the session. So I can see one person has raised the hand, Sabir Ahmed Bhatt. Yes, please unmute yourself and please ask your question briefly.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon to everyone. This is Shabir Ahmed Bhatt from Jammu and Kashmir. And the question which I posed in comment section is that in the age of social media and in the age of, globalization, the concept of self cannot be developed individually. Because way back to 200 years and 300 years, the concept of self was itself individualistic. And the practical application of that self was quite relevant for the rest of the society. But even in the age of information and communication technology and internet, one of the form of one of which is social media. You have hyper realities everyone. We grow our younger generation through falsification, viral videos, viral sites, viral news, and they got indoctrinated in that situation, in those circumstances. The concept of self there remains irrelevant because of the dominance of hyper realities. So my question is how to socialize the new generations in the age of this interconnected world, where self is not individualistic. It is totally a well-defined result of social interaction. None is private. Everything is in public domain. This is my question, which I want to clarification on this argument.
Thank you, Bhatt. Now I can see somebody OnePlus Node is asking. He has written question in the chat box. Meditation and social media are two opposite poles regarding peace. As we are living in the age of social media and technology, how can we have maintained distance from social media and addiction? So, okay, I can see. Yes. Thank you. Any other friends? Jaysri Ram, yes, please. Jairamji, please unmute yourself and ask your question briefly. Yes.
Hello, Dr. Hi, Randhir. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Hello, Dr. Anusnigdha. Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I just have one quick question. You seem to differentiate between I know you're a psychoanalyst, a psychopathologist and all that, but you seem to differentiate between the process of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and the spiritual growth and spiritual life. What in your view is the difference? Because in the end, everything is, if you're growing in any sense, if you're correcting yourself in any sense, for me, that's spiritual growth. In your field, what is the, why do you differentiate between the two fields? Were you able to hear me, Doctor?
Yes, very loud and clear. Yes.
Okay, so I'll leave the floor to you. I'm going to.
Thank you. Yes, Vidyasagar Kumar, please ask your question.
Sir, yeah, my question is, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible and you have already written your question in the chat box. Would you like to add something?
Yeah.
I think
I want to add a little bit that we are see that there is a little bit various option about the philosophical counseling,
I think there is
communication,
a
and
severe network problem from your side. So please write me in the chat box, and I have already yes. So, okay, I think he has already written the question in the chat box. Any other friends? So I can see some of the friend who directly sent question to me. Is the same question which Minati ji has asked. That is, what is social media? Why social media is such a hard habit to break? So may I invite respected speaker to answer all these concerns. And then if you have, dear friends, any other question, please indicate me in the chat box. Yes.
Thank you for all the comments and all the thoughts. It's lovely to see different kinds of questions come forward. Well, I'll start with the one that we started and ended on. Why is social media so addictive? How do we get past this sort of generation gap that if you tell children, don't be on social media, this is bad, it's not something that can actually be removed from our lives at this point. And that was what I started with as well. It's become so integrated in our lives that you cannot socially survive in this world if you say you can never use social media again. You remove it completely. That's not possible anymore. There are so many reasons why it's addictive. It's a form of escapism as well. It is a form of staying in touch with your friends. It's a form of getting news stories. It's staying updated. It's any sort of news or notification that comes in schools or work. All of it is put on social media, and they say, check our Twitter, check our Instagram, check anything, any restaurant that you want to go to will be on social media. So I don't think saying don't give access to social media to children is a viable result that we can hope for. But the aim is to be aware of what the influence might be. So to be able to see or to be able to hopefully perceive the difference of what is the narrative that is being posted online, how much does that actually relate between what is in the virtual world and what is actually in the external world, and from that, what is in the internal world. So if I look at posts of people who are now models on Instagram, how much of that is auto-tune, how much of that is filtered, how much of that is their real life, and how does that affect me? And to what extent is that affecting me? So the aim with the focused meditation is to bring about this awareness by yourself instead of needing a therapeutic session where someone else creates that environment for you. The escapism is a huge sort of source, because without this awareness, without knowing that you're on social media, because it gives you a break from reality. I don't have to worry about my real world troubles if I can browse on social media for a while. I can see what other people are posting. And it is a form of running away from problems. So the more that we start relying on it, the more we need to rely on it. And it creates a vicious circle that we would aim to break through creating these transitional spaces, through focused meditation, bringing this awareness of we're using it as an escapism, or we're not doing the right thing at this point. And for children, especially, making them aware of the false realities, the falsifications, the fake viral videos, the fake news that might exist there, to let them get critical thinking skills, to allow them to differentiate between this, would be the best possible way moving forward. Because they objectively, whether it's through internalization or whether it's through imitation as well. My parents are on their phone, my parents are using social media, so it's acceptable for me to be on my phone. So if we're having dinner and everyone is on their phone, then it starts to break down the physical reality and the physical relationships that exist. So maybe having time limits, maybe ensuring that there is acceptable content online as well, because when you open up the world, there is everything available to the children. And allowing them space every day, or at least once a week, to reflect on what the external world is, what the virtual world is, and what their internal thinking might be, would, I think, deter this false self that grows and develops through these constant interferences, or give them the space to develop their true self as well. And I think I'm moving here to Shabir's question as well. With the lack of space to develop individually, because we are now in such an integrated world and everything is hyper reality, everything is virtual reality that affects us. How do you socialize new generations? You try and keep the traditional aspects as they were. So ensuring there is family time, ensuring there is physical one-to-one time as well, and allow them to interact with both, because now there is a development that takes place with the virtual reality. It has become another layer that is internalized. It is part of their physical reality as well. I don't think I agree with the statement that we cannot develop individually, because by providing this space for awareness, for conscious understanding of what we are, we still develop individually. We might be developing in a social group that is influenced by wherever we're born, whatever our culture is, and also the external world. But we as individuals still exist within this larger group. And I hope that answers your question. And I'm doing the best. I made notes about the next questions, and I'll move on to Jairam's question about me differentiating between the two. And I think that is just a technical point that I'm making, as opposed to literally saying that they are two different aspects that need to be considered. And I completely agree with you. If you're moving towards bettering yourself, that is spiritual development, that is moving towards a more holistic sense. I was trying to emphasize that these are two forms of thought that are synonymous, but have developed in completely different areas of the world, and they haven't had as much dialogue as they should have had. So by emphasizing the differences, I was hoping to emphasize their similarities and see how the resonances can actually be used together to create a more holistic person, to aid in spiritual development as well. It's the language that is used. So within psychoanalysis, we wouldn't use the term spiritual development. We would move towards enhanced psychic structures, so the individual's ego is more developed, and the lack of common terminology is something that creates a problem. But I absolutely agree with your point that bettering yourself would be a more of a spiritual development for the person as well. Did I miss any questions? Was there something in the chat as well? Sorry.
Yes, yes. There is a question. I think somebody is asking about meditation and social media, two different opposite pole regarding the peace.
Right. Yes, I can see it now. So the comment is, meditations and social media are two opposite poles regarding peace. As we're living in an age of social media and technology, how can we maintain distance from social media addictions? Again, I think this goes back to the first point that I made. We cannot distance ourselves from social media completely, but looking at why the addictions are emerging from in the first place. So whether it's a source of boredom, whether it is a source of escapism, whether it is trying to socialize more, because especially in children, this happens when if I don't fit in with my peer group in person, in school, no one gets along with me. I find a group of my own online, and then I tend to spend more time online and discussing this with them. So there are many reasons why people might become addicted to social media. it is about the reflection, it is about awareness, it is about conscious understanding of, if you are spending too much time on social media, looking at why you're doing that. And once the why is looked at, then the addiction can be handled as well. Then consciously being aware of, whenever I'm stressed, I use my phone and I go on social media, to understanding I'm stressed right now. Usually I would go on social media, but I will maybe go for a run. Maybe I'll cook some food. Maybe I'll do something else that is more healthy and a better way of dealing with the stress, as opposed to going to social media and continuing the cycle yourself. Um, the first point of that, I don't think I completely agree that they are completely opposite ways of relating to peace as well, because there is literature that suggests that a lot of people seek spirituality and seek ways to seek spirituality through social media. So people, like this talk that we're doing, people post comments and they make their own groups about how do we come together to achieve spirituality? How do we achieve betterment of ourselves? So if used in that way, social media can also lead to bettering yourself. But the aim is to look at how it's being used, to what extent, and how much is that actually unconsciously affecting us, becoming aware of the unconscious interferences.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so Anantagiri, sir, are you there? I think he is traveling, so I can, because he will definitely add on some of the insights. So let me add some of the comment. You know what happened? People tried to, have a very narrow understanding of psychoanalytic theory. And because nowadays, with the advent of this humanist psychology, and that is being popularized everywhere, so they try to differentiate ego versus soul sort of thing. But I can recall the work of William Fairbairn. He was a Scottish psychiatrist, and he gave a theory called object relations theory. And he broke with the earlier psychoanalysts by positing that the prime motivator in humans was not biological drives, but a relationship or the attachment to another human being. So I think psychoanalytic theory has also a kind of dimension of acknowledging the primary care sort of concern. So I think we have to again, think about that thing. And so the kind of dichotomy that we create, I think it can be, if we understood, if we understand things clearly, then we can have a better understanding. Of course, psychoanalytic perspective gives us a very deeper understanding. It is not like what Sigmund Freud did. Even Carl Jung, for that matter, he also incorporated the a spiritual dimension of unconscious reality. So in that context, I personally believe that, even for that matter, John Baldwin, he also later described the several distinct pattern of attachment, for that matter. And he theorized that the early childhood, the dominant pattern of attachment becomes the property of the child and resists the change. So I think that is very important concern or theories or thinkers which we can understand. But being a sociologist, we are very much, nowadays problematizing social media and also the internet, because the kind of emerging genocide or kind of violence in America, so games has also a kind of psychoanalytic perspective we can use through how that technology which is being used by through internet, it has become a danger for civilized society. So now the question is how we can tackle. Of course, there is a government institution, but how do we? Because it is very hard to get rid of the social media nowadays. Because online education to every world reality everywhere, we find in every state apparatus there is a sort of thing. So thank you so much. It was really very insightful session, and we would like to invite you some more session to give us about more detailed understanding of psychoanalytic theory. And it is very important that psychoanalysis theory loves child psychology.
Thank you. Just with the point that you made with object relations, if we consider the people, that the primary caregiver and the early attachment that happens, these days you see so many age appropriate apps for children, also for toddlers, that you can watch a YouTube video with cartoons and you can play games and all of that. So that has now become a part of the early attachment patterns. And instead of, what would be their relatives taking care of them, now they're on tablets, now they're on phones, now they're using that. But social media is, like you said, there is a tendency to demonize everything on it as well. But it has been beneficial as well. I do want to emphasize that. So, especially for people who don't fit in, children who might be LGBTQ, children with disabilities, children with autism, for example, they can find a group that can understand them, beneficial for them. But at the same time, as you mentioned, it has led to an increase in extremism, in sexism, in racism. And these are also developing at the same time. So, unless there is external moderation somehow, and we trust that that moderation will be fair and not become right wing in its own sort of extremism. It's a very difficult situation to handle. We can't eliminate social media at all, but what we can do is be aware of the influences, be aware of how much it is affecting us, how it is changing our thought patterns, and how we interact with it as well. What do we post? What do we look at? And I think that's the way going forward.
Yes, thank you. So may I invite Minati Pradhanji to offer a vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Randhir. So, I, Minati Pradhan, on behalf of Swadhyaya Sahachakra and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, would like to thank our chief speaker, Dr. Anusnigdha ma'am, for navigating us through an important subject of the time. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. And I would like to thank our moderator, Professor Kumar Giri. I don't know whether he's able to hear or not, but thanks to him for every week arranging such beautiful webinars for all of us to learn and interact. I thank Professor Gianluigi, as always, his insightful opinions and being our co-traveler all along. Thank you, Gianluigi. And I thank all the people who asked questions and interacted, like Mr. Savir Ahmad Bhatt, Mr. Jairam Sisadri, Mr. Ram Kunte, and who are all asked the questions. I would like to thank all of them for making the session very interactive. At the last, not the least, I would like to thank our convener, Randhir Kumar Gautam, for planning and executing all the webinars very meticulously and being the backbone of our webinar. Thank you so much. And I pardon me if I have forgotten anybody's name. I would like to thank all our participants in Zoom and the Facebook platform. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Namaste.